The Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Glory to you, O Lord. Jesus said to the disciples, "For it is as if a man going on a journey summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. The one who had received the 5 talents went off at once and traded with them and made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had the 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, 'Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more talents.' His master said to him, 'Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master.' And the one with the 2 talents also came forward, saying, 'Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more talents.' His master said to him, 'Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master.' Then the one who had received the 1 talent also came forward, saying, 'Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours.' But his master replied, 'You wicked and lazy slave, you knew, did you, that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one with 10 talents. For to all those who have, more will be given, and they will have abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. I'm often reminded, and today I'm glad to remember, that every parable has multiple layers of meaning, and no single parable can contain the depth of the gospel. Now, a few weeks ago, I was intrigued by Pastor Eric's treatment of the parable of the wedding guest with no robe. If you missed that one, you can see it on YouTube. It's called The Wedding Robe. It's really good. Generally, readers interpret the king or the master in the parables to represent God. Well, Pastor Eric's take on the wedding robe parable was to turn that notion around, not to read the brutal tyrant king as God, but as human, as humanity even. And he read the wedding guest with no robe as Jesus. It's an intriguing approach, and it made sense to me. I think it's a better representation of that particular gospel message parable than any that I've heard or used for that parable before. So let's lay that template over today's parable. What if the master in the story is not Jesus, is not God, but is a 21st century gazillionaire? I mean, parables contain wild exaggeration, right? So we have a gazillionaire. And this gazillionaire parceled out her investments to wealth management experts. And even as I say this, it's with a sincere apology and mea culpa to my brother-in-law, Otis, who is a wealth management expert. So this master of money, Miss Moneymaster, entrusted her first expert with $50 million, according to his record of making money for her in the past. To her second expert, she entrusted $20 million, according to the same criteria. Now, to the third expert, she gave $10 million. She wasn't quite so confident with the third expert. By the way, in the parable, what is called talent is a first-century coin equal to about 15 years' income. It's a lot of money. Ms. Moneymaster left her investments with the experts for a long time. My understanding is that to make money through investments, you have to be willing to leave it there for a long, long time. And of course, the first two experts invested wisely, and they doubled her money. The third expert didn't do so well. He panicked when the stock market fell and sold the shares he had bought. At least he recouped the original investment. And maybe then he kept moving it from one thing to another through the entire time Ms. Moneymaster was away. The $10 million didn't earn a single penny. In fact, over the years, the same $10 million was worth less because of inflation. He might just as well have buried it in the ground. Well, Ms. Moneymaster was pleased with the first two investors, and she gave them responsibility for even more of her money, and she invited them to participate in the joy of her world. Notice in the parable, however, they are still slaves. Then Jesus' commentary about the first two experts is paraphrased, "The rich get richer." But Ms. Moneymaster was not pleased with the third guy. She took back the $10 million, and then she went after him. She called him worthless and lazy, and she made sure her friends in the money world would never do business with him again. He will never be trusted to manage anyone's wealth again. So there he is, left with nothing and out of business. In the world of high finance, his future is outer darkness. For him, the world is a cruel place. Life is hell. And Jesus' commentary is, the poor get poorer. This parable is nestled between the parable about 5 bridesmaids who weren't ready when the bridegroom arrived, and the prophecy you'll hear next week about the judgment of the nations, which will be surprising to everyone involved. Today's story might serve to tell us that being ready for Christ to appear and how to live in the meantime doesn't look like what we expect. It doesn't look like what 21st century economics would tell us that readiness and wholeness of life are like. In fact, the economics of this world can serve to hinder our readiness for Christ's presence and can lead to a hellish life. What if Jesus tells this story as a commentary against what we typically worship, a socioeconomic system in which we put our trust and through which we expect to see salvation? What we expect is for God to act like the master in this parable, who rewards those who use money well and castigates those who aren't economically shrewd. Maybe secretly, we want the master in this parable to be a representation of God so that we can justify, even just in a little way, our devotion to that God of economics. we as a society, as a community, even maybe individually, tend to superimpose our own image, our own values on God so that we can continue to enjoy the lifestyle we think is life-giving, but is really just destructive, because people are suffering in this world. And when one person suffers, we all suffer, even though we try to keep it out of sight, out of mind. Jesus told us, keep awake. You don't know the day or the hour, for it is as if Ms. Moneymaster, going on a journey, summons her slaves and entrusts her property to them. What are we expecting? We don't know the timing. But also, we're probably not looking for what he's going to look like, or be like, or judge like, or love like. He will be right in front of us, and we won't know him because we will be looking for someone different. We will be looking for someone who looks like us. What if we don't read God or Jesus in this parable at all? What if this is simply a commentary of first century and 21st century economics, and how the kingdom of heaven is assaulted by violence, of the rich getting richer while the poor get poorer? It's an age-old system of economics, not new. What if Jesus is making a strong statement about people or institutions or economic systems in positions of power, making life hell, even in this already but not yet kingdom? In this gospel, the writer doesn't hold back on statements like that. Jesus' life begins in this gospel with a wailing and loud lamentation of parents in and around Bethlehem whose sons, 2 years old and younger, are murdered by King Herod in an attempt to save his position from a potential rival king. And then about the time Jesus was rejected by the people of his hometown, Herod Antipas, the son of the infant-killing Herod, had John the Baptist beheaded to save face with his mistress and her daughter and his birthday party guests. The leaders of the temple continually nip at Jesus' heels as he goes about teaching and healing and telling the good news of the kingdom of heaven. And finally, they conspire a plan to arrest him secretly and have him killed. And all the while, through the whole thing, the specter of Rome looms heavy over the whole narrative. The occupying army, the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, brought about by torture and violence against anyone who would resist Rome's authority. The cross hangs heavy in the foreground of this whole gospel narrative. And these last few weeks and next week are Jesus' final teachings before he's arrested and crucified. And just preceding this set of readings is his lament over Jerusalem. He says, "How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you, desolate, and not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down." And not 40 years after he says this, Rome levels the temple, burns it to the ground. The city around it is destroyed. Its people are starved. Their system of economic strength couldn't stop the destruction. It didn't matter whether they were the two shrewd money investors or the third worthless investor. The people and their fortress of security were no more. In what do we put our trust? What Savior are we expecting? In 2 Sundays, we enter the time of Advent, waiting, expecting, straining in the darkness to see the light of Christ, God incarnate, as he comes to us. Will we recognize him? I heard that statistic that Pastor Eric said during the announcements, that Americans are expected to spend $600 billion on Christmas shopping this year. It makes me think of all those Christian people, who scream about stores whose policy it is to have their employees say Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas, and they wear buttons that say, put Christ back into Christmas. Well, maybe Christ doesn't want to be in the Christmas we celebrate in the stores. Maybe Christ is only in the Christmas we celebrate with the lost and the lonely, the hurting and the needy, the sad and the grieving. Maybe Christ isn't in a purchased gift or ornament at all. Maybe Christ is in the hungry, the thirsty, the naked, the imprisoned. And the only way to celebrate the advent of that Christ is with those gifts to the hungry, the thirsty, the naked, the imprisoned. No parable can contain the entirety of the gospel. Maybe this one points to the hellish existence that human beings create for ourselves and for each other in this not yet complete kingdom of heaven. This could be one of those scriptures that Luther might say shows us our need for Christ's grace and sends us into his embrace, sets us off at a run to his table of Holy Communion, where we see and hear and taste again God's promises that God will never give up on this old world. That scary prophecy of global destruction in Zephaniah is met with Christ on the cross and Christ at his table, his body given for us, his blood shed for us for the forgiveness of sin. For God has destined us not to suffer the wrath and hell that we create, but to be released from it, even released from the socioeconomic systems that hold us captive.